Nobody invented the missile to kill people from thousands of miles away. It was built by people trying to escape Earth's gravity, hijacked by a legal loophole. Today, 9 countries hold enough missile-delivered warheads to end civilization. Not one of the men who built the first true missile was trying to build a weapon of mass destruction. They were trying to reach the stars. 1780s, southern India. The Kingdom of Mysore, under Tipu Sultan, was fighting the British East India Company. Mysorean engineers had developed iron-cased rockets, tubes of gunpowder mounted on bamboo shafts, more powerful and reliable than anything Europe had. At the Battle of Seringapatam, these rockets tore through British ranks, launching in volleys of thousands. A British artillery officer named William Congreve watched his own men get shredded by a weapon Europe did not have. Congreve did not invent the rocket. He copied one that had just humiliated his own army.
He returned to England and spent years refining the design, adding a stabilizing stick, standardizing the powder mixture. By 1805, the Congreve rocket was in official British military use. It was wildly inaccurate, more psychological weapon than precision tool, but it was the first modern military rocket program in the West, and it existed because British soldiers had been burned by someone else's weapon first. The accuracy problem sat unsolved for 40 years. A rocket with a stick tumbled unpredictably in flight. Nobody could hit a specific target beyond a few hundred yards. William Hale, a British inventor, was not a soldier or an engineer by training. He noticed something about rifled bullets. Spin made them fly straighter. He removed the stick entirely and angled the exhaust vents to spin the rocket in flight, the same way rifling spins a bullet. The Hale rocket, patented in 1844, was more accurate and needed no launching stick. The military weapon was solved.
Nobody was thinking about space yet. That came from a deaf schoolteacher in rural Russia. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky lost most of his hearing to scarlet fever as a child and was largely self-taught, reading obsessively, including the science fiction of Jules Verne. He became fixated on a question with no military application: how do you leave the planet? In 1903, he published the rocket equation, the mathematical relationship between a rocket's velocity, its exhaust speed, and its mass ratio. It is still the foundational equation of all rocketry today. Tsiolkovsky was not building a weapon. He was working out how a human being might someday stand on the moon. Robert Goddard, an American physics professor, read Tsiolkovsky's work and pursued the same dream from the opposite side of the planet. In 1926, in a snowy field in Massachusetts, Goddard launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. It flew for 2.5 seconds, reached 41 feet, and landed 184 feet away.
The New York Times mocked him in an editorial, claiming he lacked the knowledge ladled out daily in high schools about how rockets could not work in the vacuum of space. Goddard was ridiculed for the rest of his career. He kept working anyway, obsessed with reaching altitude, not with building weapons. The Times issued a formal correction in 1969, 3 days after Apollo 11 launched on its way to the moon. In Germany, a group of amateur enthusiasts read the same rocket equation and formed a club. The Verein für Raumschifffahrt, the Society for Space Travel, founded in 1927, was made up of hobbyists, students, and dreamers who met to build and test small rockets for fun, chasing the same fantasy as Tsiolkovsky and Goddard. Among the teenagers who joined was a young man named Wernher von Braun, who wanted, in his own words, to help humanity reach other planets. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped Germany of heavy artillery, tanks, and military aircraft after World War I.
The treaty said nothing about rockets. Nobody in 1919 had considered them a weapon worth banning. The German army noticed the gap. In the early 1930s, army officers approached the amateur rocket club and its most promising member, the 20-year-old von Braun, and offered funding, real funding, for research that had nothing to do with treaties or war in the minds of the young engineers doing it. Von Braun took the deal to keep doing the only thing he had ever wanted to do: build rockets that could fly higher than anyone had flown before. By 1942, von Braun's team launched the A-4, later renamed the V-2, the world's first ballistic missile, reaching the edge of space before falling back to Earth at over 3,500 miles per hour, impossible to intercept with the technology of the era. Von Braun reportedly said the day of the first successful launch was bittersweet. The rocket worked perfectly, except for landing on the wrong planet.
Over 3,000 V-2s were fired at London, Antwerp, and other Allied cities, killing an estimated 9,000 civilians. More people died building the V-2, worked to death in the underground Mittelwerk factory by concentration camp labor, than died from the missiles it launched. When Germany fell in 1945, both the United States and the Soviet Union raced to capture the V-2 technology and the men who built it.
The U.S. ran Operation Paperclip, recruiting von Braun and over 100 of his engineers, quietly setting aside their Nazi Party memberships and, in several cases, direct involvement in the slave labor that built the rockets. Von Braun ended up in the Texas desert, then in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the U.S. Army and eventually for NASA. The same man who once wanted to reach other planets and whose rocket had rained down on London spent the rest of his career building the Saturn V that carried Apollo 11 to the moon. The Soviet Union captured different V-2 hardware and different engineers and put a previously imprisoned aerospace designer named Sergei Korolev in charge of their rocket program. Korolev had spent years in a Soviet gulag on fabricated charges before the war, nearly dying from the conditions. He rebuilt Soviet rocketry from the V-2's blueprint and went on to lead the program that launched Sputnik in 1957 and put Yuri Gagarin into orbit in 1961. Both superpowers' space programs and both superpowers' missile programs trace back to the same German rocket, built by a hobby club chasing a treaty loophole. Because the same rocket that can lift a satellite into orbit can lift a warhead onto a city. Every advance made in the name of exploration doubled as an advance in the ability to deliver a nuclear weapon anywhere on the planet. Inertial guidance systems developed to keep a rocket pointed at the moon were the same systems that let an intercontinental ballistic missile hit a target 6,000 miles away within a few hundred meters. By the height of the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union each held thousands of these missiles, aimed at each other's cities, under a doctrine with the literal acronym MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. The missile was never designed as the most efficient way to end a civilization. It was assembled from a stolen rocket copied from a defeated Indian kingdom, a spin stabilization trick borrowed from rifle bullets, a deaf schoolteacher's equation written for a dream of the moon, an American professor mocked by his own newspaper, and a teenage rocket club that took a weapons deal to keep chasing outer space. Somewhere in that chain, a gap in a peace treaty turned a hobby to the deadliest delivery system ever built. And somewhere in Huntsville, Alabama, a man who once dreamed only of leaving Earth spent the rest of his life half building the machine that could end it. Click here. How humans accidentally created nuclear weapons.